Closed captioning for Justice and Law Weekly is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices in support of quality public television for the Chicago area.
Welcome to the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly. I'm Aurora Abella Austriaco, President of the Chicago Bar Association. I'm excited to introduce attorney Laurel Bellows as my guest. Ms. Bellows is the newly inducted President of the American Bar Association. She's the principal in the Bellows Law Group PC and is an experienced business lawyer who counsels senior executives around the world on employment matters. Ms. Bellows was also the second woman to serve as president of the Chicago Bar Association. She has received numerous honors and awards. She has also written and lectured extensively. Welcome, Laurel Bellows.
And friend of Aurora, right?
Yes.
Thanks for having me, Aurora.
Thank you, Laurel. And also, I didn't include in there my favorite mentor, one of my favorite mentors. So thank you so much, Laurel, for coming here today. I know you've got a very, very busy schedule, but I wanted to give us some have you give us some information about, your background. I know you've been in Chicago and you've had a very good 35 years of legal practice here in Chicago.
Ooh, that sounds like a lot. It goes fast, right?
I know, it really does. Tell us about your experience growing up in Chicago and how has that helped you shape the woman that you are today?
My experience growing up in Chicago is not so much what shaped, although this city is the city I adore and will never leave. I think it's the spirit of Chicago that shapes a lot of my attitude. It's the can-do, will-do, kind of rise from the ashes of the Chicago fire, reinvent yourself after Stockyards debacle, the continuing, the tech emphasis that we have now, but just the friendly, small town, people-to-people atmosphere of the city and the willingness to work together. The heartland part of our town is what I love, along with that energy, combined with the fact that you can walk down the street and see people you know, even though this is a really big city. So it is the opportunity to accomplish whatever you want, the unlimited opportunity that this city offers, I think is probably what shaped a lot of what I do and think, and I never thought about it until you just brought it up. So thanks, Aurora.
Well, the other thing also is I know you're very, very close to your mother, Lois, who is an absolutely, absolutely wonderful woman. And I know your mom has actually taught you about the independence, financially being independent. What has she taught you as you're growing up? And if you can share that with us.
Well, I think it probably comes not only from my mom, but from the fact that I had a kind of a matriarchal bringing up. I had three very strong-minded aunts, great aunts, my grandmother and her two sisters, and then my mother as well. And they all believed in economic independence for women. Right. They all believed that you should have a family if you can choose to have one, but that you should be prepared for supporting yourself and supporting the family. And I think it was that recognition that drove my mom to make sure that I got a college education, that I then went to law school or business school, my choice, that I always had a job, and that I was responsible for taking care of myself. And that has served me very well. And I believe I've passed it on to our daughter and our other children. So I think that every woman today, and we can talk a little bit about that later when we talk about gender equity initiatives, but every woman today has a responsibility to understand that she is responsible for herself and her family, not somebody else.
Right, right. And that's a very good point because your daughter, one of your daughters, Lindsay, she is just an absolute, absolute delight, has been an independent woman, just like Mom.
Maybe too independent, Aurora, right?
That's right. Hey, that's what we're teaching our kids,
right? That's right. So when they get up and they go, right, and they fly and they do very well, then, then you want to kind of reel them back in because you miss them, but we've taught them independence and we have to be thrilled that they're, they're able to survive on their own.
That's right, that's right. Well, you have done fairly well, and looking at all your achievements. But tell us about your practice, because I know you started your practice with your husband, Joel.
That's right.
And then you formed your own, or not really formed your own, but in conjunction.
Right,
okay.
I did. So Joel and I have been practicing together, and we still are allied. We have side-by-side law firms right now. I have a woman-owned firm that I started 2 years ago, and frankly, that's quite a bit for business purposes because corporations are wanting to be more diverse in their supply chain, wanting to give business to women and minority-owned firms.
Right.
And also that provides them with the rationale to support giving business to small firms. So they have, often corporations have trouble giving business to small law firms because they don't have the credibility, where a woman-owned firm has the ability to say both, you're doing something good, and as president of the Chicago Bar Association, president of the American Bar Association, we have the credibility to do your work. So that in part, you know, aligned with Joel, but separate firms.
Right.
But Joel taught me how to practice law. I came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, went to a small firm.
Right.
They dissolved within 6 months of my practice. I decided to be a trial lawyer. Couldn't find a job in those years. That was 1976. As a trial lawyer, women did not try cases at the time. Right. And Joel was willing to train me as a trial lawyer, so I went to work for this guy, and we then fell in love, and the rest is history, and he taught me everything I know about practicing law, and he's been tremendously psychologically, emotionally supportive, and financially supportive of this kind of adventure through the organized bar.
Yeah, he's truly wonderful, and I love seeing him around whenever we go to Bar Association events.
Yeah, he's fabulous.
But tell us about the practice that you have. Is it representing senior executives, women?
So I have a general business practice, but what I do is I started out representing women in as they came to me wanting to be represented when they were executives and just wanting a woman lawyer many years ago. And that has turned out to a referral of business of mostly senior level and mid-management as they either have to choose a job and negotiate an employment contract, or they're losing a job and negotiating a severance agreement, or they're choosing to move on, all right, and they need to negotiate their way out and then their way in. A little bit of marriage and divorce in the corporation world. Right. And it is very personal work because every employment decision is a personal crisis, even if it's a good one, employment, right? How much do I push for? What do I negotiate? Will they still want me if I negotiate a little harder? Severance agreement, humiliation perhaps if it's not in your control. Not having had to go find a lawyer if you're a CEO or a CFO, the general counsel always took care of you. So finding a lawyer and then allowing them to negotiate something that is going to guide you for the rest of your life, give you enough money to survive until in these impossible times you find a new position, positioning yourself in a new way and getting over the fact that that decision was made without your control. When you control a decision, Aurora, right, even if it's a difficult decision, it's a lot easier. So a lot of my practice is quite personal, psychological, problem-solving, strategic, everything I love to do. And then I counsel large corporations on the corporate side. I do the same thing, negotiating the in and out of their executives, but I also do a lot of strategic counseling for senior general counsels on the problems that they face very quietly, working through a lot of the issues that, you know, maybe they have to completely reinvent their company. How do they go about doing it? Maybe they have some very significant crisis, and so they usually bring me in along with their team to do strategic and business consulting for them.
Right. So would what you do in your practice and then your active involvement in the community and the legal community with all your leadership responsibilities and then family life and then being a wife, how do you do it? I mean, you know, how do you maintain a balance, if there is such a thing? Or I will quote you on what you have told before. How do you manage your chaos?
Well, I think, you know, it's only fair to say, as you and I have talked about a number of times, I don't.
Right.
All right. I think telling people out there that, you know, it's even manageable, even if we use that word managed chaos instead of what I hate, you know, just talk about balanced life. You know, I feel that anybody who thinks that they're, you know, they're in control and managing every life moment is, you know, is misrepresenting to the other women in this world, and the men too, that it's possible to do that. So you just kind of get up in the morning, you try and figure out what that emergency is that you're going to get accomplished. I used to keep this emergency list. We've talked about this too. Yeah, you know, the 5 things that if I didn't get them done that day, the world would end. And then I would wake up the next morning and find that I hadn't done 3 of the world would end, and I had just woken up, right? So I think a sense of humor, a supportive environment, you know, other people, training other people, learning to delegate. I think women do not delegate. We always think that we're the only ones who can take our child to the Well, your husband is the dentist, so that doesn't actually count. But taking more responsibility for our children, and if it's not children, taking more responsibility for our calendars and just letting go a little bit. And the other is, I'd like to say I'm truly organized. I'm not. Those women who really are organized are much better at management. I would say, like you, I'm a major multitasker. And my head continues to spin, and I just do the best I can to keep up with what I've got. Setting priorities, of course, and those priorities will on any day vary between a family priority or an American Bar Association crisis. And then I'm always leaving a moment in my brain for what we didn't know would happen, some horror, the murders that have recently taken place in New York City, the things that we just can't control. So I think that what I suggest is I'm realizing that if I keep a little space in my brain, even though I don't know what that space is for, even though I just keep this mental moment, then when that comes, I say, I'm making it up, of course, but I convince myself that I've already got that space there, and I can handle the crisis that comes, whatever that crisis of the day is, hopefully. And then I do a lot of this.
And that's exactly,
And then I have friends like you that I call and say, help. And that's the other thing. I think women are great about helping others, but they're not good about asking help for themselves.
That is very true, Laurel. And one thing that I found out with you as my mentor is, I know I can always count you, I can always call you, and as well as there's probably hundreds of women who do the same. They want to call you because they've considered you their role model.
Yeah, but I think the important part is, you are not just a mentee. You're like the most successful, fabulous woman in the world, and you're my friend. So I know that I could call you. You know you can call me. Do you? Rarely, rarely, right? Because we want to be understanding of our own time and energy and priorities, and so we don't call on each other to help each other, and yet when that call comes, you're the most willing person in the world to help. So we should do more of that.
I believe so, but I do want to go back. We'll talk about you being president of the American Bar Association, but I want to go back in time to 1991 when you became the second woman president of the Chicago Bar Association, and you formed the Alliance for Women, which is to this date one of the strongest part of the Chicago Bar Association, and it has hundreds of members. And I wanted to just find out from you, what made you decide to form the Alliance for Women back there? I think it's 20 years. We're celebrating 20 years
Isn't that amazing?
This year. And how has being president of the Chicago Bar back then kind of prepared you to take on the leadership of the American Bar Association?
Well, the Chicago Bar Association is still my home. I'm a Chicago lawyer. This is where I started when I was a young lawyer, and I don't really know another bar association like the Chicago Bar. It helped me in everything. It helped me in the practice of law, and it helped me make the connections that I needed just in life, and it gave me, the support system. So being president of the Chicago Bar was, the most incredible moment of my life. And I still would say it's the most important memory that I have that has to do with the organized bar is embedded in my brain, kind of stepping up and being scared to death of the mic at the time. And now, I kind of eat the mic for breakfast.
Couldn't take the mic away from you, Laura.
You can't get the mic away from me. But I remember the combination, the humbling experience of saying, oh my goodness, these people really trust me to run a very powerful organization with unlimited possibility to help our city and our county and our state move forward, and then help the individual lawyers of this community. That responsibility kind of hit me and then gave me the opportunity to begin to understand that you can make a difference, all right, and you can guide. At that time, our juvenile justice program in Chicago was in need of some serious assistance and revamping. The politicians didn't want to touch it because it was not a short-term project. The judges didn't have the control of the system. The Cook County wasn't funding it adequately. Our juvenile detention system was in crisis, and it was a holistic cure that had to happen. Somebody had to come and bring health care and education and discipline and the court system and family care all together in one place, and the Chicago Bar was perfectly placed. So how did the Chicago Bar help me plan for where I am today? It gave me everything. It gave me Terry Murphy, the most amazing executive director
fabulous?
in the universe, right? And it gave me, you know, just a support team that said, we can accomplish miracles here, Laurel. We just have to put one foot in front of the other. So planning and then support and then execution, that's what the Chicago Bar was all about. The Alliance for Women was easy. I mean, it was a surprise to me. There was no plan. It was that halfway through my year, I looked in the mirror and I said, I'm a woman and I'm president of the Chicago Bar. Things must be great for women, but maybe I should ask, right? Okay. So I called up 5 friends. You know, the story is, we'll talk about it again in a week, right, when we celebrate the anniversary. But I called up like a large firm lawyer, small firm lawyer, academic, government lawyer. And at that time, the Chicago Bar was serving these amazing cinnamon rolls in the morning, right? Yes. And so for me to say, invite 5 or 10 women over and say, come on, I'm going to give you these cinnamon rolls, right? Come at 7:30, and if you want to bring other people, you can bring them, but I want to talk about how women are doing. And so I expected my 5 friends to show up, maybe just 3 of them, because it was 7:30 in the morning, right? And 75 women showed up.
Here. Wow.
And I realized right then that we had a problem. Yeah. And some of them came 5 and 6 from one law firm, and they had never met each other before. There were no affinity groups in the law firms. There was no support system. They were afraid to talk at the water cooler together because they would be accused of kind of plotting if there were more than 2 or 3 women. Right. They weren't making progress in places like the litigation department. And we had a lot of work to do. So we, and then I wanted to make certain that it wasn't competition with the women's bar. That was not the concept. But the women's bar was not taking on cutting-edge issues. And frankly, back to Terry Murphy and to our board, there was a tremendous amount of support for gender equity.
Right, right.
And so they, you know, they supported me in saying we had to have an Alliance for Women that was ready to take on the cutting issues, but not in the women's bar, as a mainstream conversation. Right. And as a result of that, the story writes itself, because we at the Chicago Bar have had this tremendous effort of diversity initiatives.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for starting that.
Well, it's the Alliance that did it, right?
We're talking about gender equity, then let's go into some of your initiatives as president of the American Bar Association. And I have to let you know that walking you down, I always say walking you down the aisle with the entire Illinois delegation in August for the American Bar Association was so wonderful to see you, you know, at the helm of the American Bar Association, a national and international, I would say, recognized Bar Association. Yeah. You have an ambitious agenda. You have several initiatives that you actually would like to accomplish, and I know gender
equity, right,
is one of them. Why don't you tell us some of the things that you would like to?
Well, on gender equity, I have to say it's been very difficult to get our arms around what we would like to do that would actually move the dial forward. It's I don't want to be a complainer. I mean, I want to accomplish something, and instead of saying what may not be good, what was in the past, talk about the future. But the future has to be based on the fact that we really have not made progress in our profession, or frankly, all that much progress in our world, in our United States of America, on moving women into significant places. Visibility of a few women does not equal equality.
Right. Right.
And we have a number of women, and we have a lot of progress in our law firms. But if you have no more than 16% equity partners in your large firms around the country, and that number is the highest number in 20 years, and it's been stagnant basically for 2 years, we're not growing, and then you even have to talk about what is the progress to become equity partner, and then compensation issues. 60% of women who are equity partners don't understand how their compensation is determined, and women are making a lot less money than men in law firms generally. So that we also have a tremendous concern about what our newest generation of women and minority lawyers are thinking, that they're not necessarily seeing the barriers that persist, and then when the barriers hit them, they don't identify them as a result of gender equity barriers. Right. So they say, oh, I must not be good enough. And that's something we have to overcome. We have to indicate the barriers persist. So what are we doing? We are launching a social media campaign to that includes men and women in this millennial generation of lawyers. I'm hoping the Chicago Bar with you will join in, because it's a conversation we just need to have on social media about talking about what are the issues that women face, what are the issues that men face, what are the quality of life concerns, what are the weight of, to what extent can we practice law. I don't want women to opt out. They are opting out of our profession before they're opting in, before they have a chance to prove themselves. And I want to have a very positive conversation with our younger generation of women, because they're hearing only the negative. They're hearing barriers persist, but they're not hearing and seeing the law that you and I practice, the thrill of being a lawyer, in addition to the organized bar and the power to change that we have, which is so exciting. So, but we need to talk to the women about the power of being a great lawyer and the thrill, back to economic independence, of being your own person. And the satisfaction, the personal satisfaction that then translates into a happier person, that translates back into a family that's secure and really filled with opportunity. So this is not a conversation that women are hearing. So I want them to understand that the practice of law is filled with opportunities to pick which kind of law you want to practice. And it's like being a doctor. Do you want to be a dermatologist, or do you want to be a surgeon? You know, there is not one way. Do you want to be a legal service provider? Do you, I mean, or do you want to be the consummate trial lawyer? Those choices don't seem to be in the news. All we're hearing about is either discrimination or women who say, I'm choosing a different path. But they don't talk about the women who love the practice of law, like you and I do, don't talk about the wonder of the practice. So that's one issue. And then the other we'll do is we will be doing a model compensation policy for large firms. Instead of talking about how it's not working, just like 10 years ago, the ABA did fair measure, gender-neutral evaluation techniques, performance evaluation, we're going to do model compensation policy.
Okay. Well, I'm sure once you roll it out, would love to be you know, we'd love to help you out from the Chicago Bar Association, Laurel. Anything that you
Chicago Bar is the perfect rollout, right? So yeah, you'll be there, Aurora. You don't even have a choice, right?
Okay. Yeah, I'll show you that much, Laurel.
No, it'll be wonderful to have you involved. Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, you also indicated about the you mentioned about the, you know, Legal Led Better Act. You were helpful in getting that passed as well. And then you've got the
Paycheck Fairness Act, which is a real disappointment. So we'll be lobbying very strongly on making certain that you can't be retaliated against for asking somebody else what they make, so you can determine whether your paycheck is fair or not. I mean, right now we have Lilly Ledbetter, we have an Equal Pay Act, but if you don't know what other people are making, how do you know whether you're getting paid equally until you're terminated and you begin to question? So there's that. There's the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, all right? It is, as you know, makes me quite angry. You can get me pretty incensed publicly on the fact that today we cannot pass the Violence Against Women Act and get it reauthorized. We've asked for some additions to the act, but they're perfectly reasonable additions that talk about having the Violence Against Women Act apply in the Native American reservation. I mean, to Native American women who are being, you know, the subject of domestic or other violence, and they shouldn't have the ability, according to some people in our Congress, to use the Violence Against Women Act. So what's holding up reauthorization is inexcusable. And the very fact that the United States of America can't pass a Violence Against Women Act in its Congress is unthinkable. But in addition to that, one of my, and it's great to talk about it because State's Attorney Anita Alvarez is strongly involved in an anti-trafficking initiative here in Chicago. So the American Bar Association has launched a national anti-trafficking initiative. We're looking to focus using Anita's fabulous law here in Illinois, because we can be very, very proud of the work that she's done and the fact that Illinois is one of the model states. We will use that law and a couple of other state laws as a model for uniform state law, anti-trafficking against sex and labor trafficking. You probably know, because Anita's been so outspoken, thank goodness, that in this community, we're very aware that human trafficking, modern-day slavery exists in the United States and exists here in Chicago. I think what most people don't understand is that there's no place, practically no place in this country that is untouched by human trafficking, by women and children and men who are brought into this country, and U.S. citizens, 100,000, we think, U.S. citizens, who are actually forced into labor or sex for the profit of the perpetrators. And this is organized crime at its very worst. And following Anita's example here, we're going to be taking that fight national awareness campaign, cleaning supply chains, helping corporations cleaning their supply chains so they're eliminating slave labor from their supply chains.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about, you know, cleaning supply chains. What does that really mean? Do corporations have to really look at who they do business with, where
Precisely.
they get, you know, the labor work from?
So we talked about it. It was a topic, a great topic when we talked about child labor and U.S. corporations who were manufacturing here in the United States or manufacturing outside this country. And unbeknownst to them, somewhere in their chain, one of their suppliers, a manufacturer of some piece, all right, a shoelace or it could be, you know, a component of a part, that manufacturer might have been using child labor. That is even easier to talk about, because there they would say that our culture permits us to use children who are younger than you might accept in the United States. And we have indicated what our minimum child hiring requirements are, and that those need to be followed by every corporation in the United States, including by their suppliers. Now, when you talk about slave labor, you're talking about something that's very much under the table, not as readily identifiable, but the corporations have had experience now in making certain that their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers' suppliers. All right, now we're talking about going to the farm where the caterpillars give silk, so that the thread that's made from the silk that's put into your shirt, that's woven in someplace and designed by somebody and then shipped by somebody to the store in the United States or elsewhere in the world as a result of a U.S. company, all right, manufacturing that product. How far down can we require that they go? And how far down should we guide them to go, require them to go, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 levels down to start with, and then begin to talk about best practices for the rest of the way down until we can really insinuate into the entire system. Because, Aurora, if we strangle the profit out of slave labor all the way down to the very lowest level of supply chain, then there will not be a profit in slave labor, and we will actually be able to eradicate slavery, all right, not only in the United States, but around the world. Now, is that naive? To some extent, yes, it is. I mean, we're probably never going to eradicate something that horrible everywhere in the world. But if we can make people aware that what is happening and the cost of what is happening, we're going to be able to strangle the profit out of most of the slave trade, both in prostitution and in labor. But American Bar Association is aiming for within the United States and the corporations that are homed, you know, that are residents of the United States.
Right.
Do business here, and you won't be doing business with modern-day slaves.
Right, and it has to start somewhere. So I'm glad, Laurel, that you are actually bringing it out to the forefront, and it's your voice, you know, on local and national, that will actually make people more aware of how big of a problem that really is.
Huge.
Well, you know, one last question, and I know we're running out of time. I have tons of questions for you, Laurel, but actually, who is your role model? Real quickly.
Okay, that's Esther Rothstein.
Okay.
First woman president of the Chicago Bar Association. Tough taskmaster, but taught me everything there is to know about helping people, about leadership, about being a woman and being a lawyer. I thank her. She's an angel on my shoulder every moment of my life.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurel. I wish I had more time because I have so many other questions, but perhaps another time we'll get you back in here.
I look forward to it, Aurora.
Right. Thanks, Laurel. American Bar Association President Laurel Bellows, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We wish you a successful and exciting year as president. I'm Aurora Bellows. Thank you for joining us for the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly.
Closed captioning for Justice and Law Weekly is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices in support of quality public television for the Chicago area.